Welcome to Podcasting Smarter, the podcast for podcasters by podcasters. Podcasting Smarter is the official podcast from Podbean, featuring podcasting interviews, best practices, and helpful tips. We're here to give you the tools, resources, product updates, and news to help you get started podcasting and keep your podcast growing.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Podcasting Smarter December Live, everything you need to know to start a podcast in the new year. We're so excited about this because podcasting, a lot of people set the intention to start a podcast in the new year. They have goals, they plan it out. They're like, okay, I'm going to start in the new year. Set that New Year's resolution, New Year's intention to get that podcast started. So that's what we are talking about today. I'm so excited. I'm going to read our brief intro. We're joined here by our customer success manager, Roni Gosch, and then we'll jump in and we'll get started. Hello, Roni. Okay. And hello, everybody joining us today. Here we go. So welcome back, everyone, to Podcasting Smarter and our December live event, Everything You Need to Know to Start a Podcast in the New Year, with Customer Success Manager Roni Gosch, as we discuss how to launch your podcast and have it up and running for the new year. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, Podcasting Smarter has live stream sessions like this one with top podcasters, experts, and we also have exclusive recorded episodes on the Podcasting Smarter podcast, so make sure to check that out. Podcasting Smarter is brought to you by Podbean. We're a podcast hosting and monetizing platform and home to over 620,000 podcasts. To start your podcast, head over to podbean.com today. And now we'll get started. Hi, Roni.
Hey, Norma Jean. How's it going?
Good. So I'm so excited to talk to you about this because, people have so much excitement about starting their podcast. It's really it's like, that initial seed, you feel like you've been struck by lightning. We had a guest on the Podcasting Smarter podcast explain it like that. That idea just struck me like lightning. And so for everybody out there who has been struck by lightning by an amazing idea, is super excited to share their voice, get their podcast up and running, we want to help you do it in the new year. So we are so excited about today's live stream. And first of all, let's just kind of go over what we're going to go over today. Just so we can make sure that, for everybody here watching at the beginning, or if you're watching the replay, what we're going to go over today is the who, what, where, when, and why of your podcast, formatting your show, a brief overview of the types of gear for recording, what is a podcast host, and then creative points, why they matter, what's important there. If you have any questions, drop them here in the chat. You can also reach out to us at podcastingsmarter@podbean.com if you have any follow-up questions. So we're always here to support, and we love hearing your questions. So first of all, we're Podbean. So we have a lot of resources here, and we're one of the top hosting and monetization companies. And podcast hosting is what we'll get into later. But that's really where you're going to publish your podcast. And so we'll talk about what those details are later about what that entails. But we've been a leader in the industry since 2005. So we're pretty excited to be here. And over 600,000 podcasts are hosted with Podbean. So just know that you're in good hands. You're talking to people who have been in the industry for a while.
We've been here a minute.
Yeah. And we also have a lot of monetization options. So we're not going to cover that today, but there's a lot of other content on our site and on our YouTube channel about our monetization, about podcast ads and sponsorship and patron programs and all that good stuff. So if you do have any questions, we're here to support that as well. So let's dive into it. Let's start with the why, Roni.
Oh, yes. This is whenever somebody comes up to me and they say, I have an idea and I want to start a podcast. I tell them the first thing that you want to ask yourself when you're doing this is not, okay, what is the podcast going to be about? This is the initial idea. How do I go forward? It's why does it have to be a podcast? What about the podcasting medium is driving you to tell your story that way? Because that's what it is. It's the vehicle through which you're going to tell your story, which you're going to share information, which you're going to try to create an audience for. And so what is it about podcasting that really draws you in? And it differs for everybody because some people say, I really like how I can engage one-on-one with people. Podcasting has a very low barrier of entry. So anybody can start a podcast. All you really need is a phone and a pair of headphones and you can start a podcast. Unlike, I want to start a TV show. It's kind of hard to start a TV show. I want to write a book and get it published. That does take a minute. I say somebody with a master's in English. I know it takes a minute. But with a podcast, you really can just say, okay, I want to start a podcast. And 60 seconds later, okay, I recorded my episode by starting my podcast. And so the question is, why is that medium the best for the story that you want to tell? And so once you figure that out, that will inform how you kind of craft your podcast, how you, craft, your social media, how you promote your podcast, who you're really trying to promote your podcast to. So once you know why the podcasting medium is perfect for your story, you'll be able to take the next steps and know that you're going the right direction for your podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you said about why a podcast, right? So, I mean, We'll talk about the nuances of what you can get out of a podcast in a bit, but there's so many mediums out there. And as podcasters, I think it's important to understand that you also may want to have a YouTube version of your show, right? You may want to have a video component. And at Podbean, we host videos. So, it's there for you. But, is your audience maybe like going for walks or commuting, right? Are they in a car or on public transportation? When are they going to listen? Are they doing the dishes, right? Like when are they going to be able to listen to your show? Yeah, absolutely. Because if you have a show of people that, never have a free second, that might be, or maybe they only do one thing at a time, maybe, podcasting wouldn't be the primary medium. And also, in terms of the why you're starting a podcast on the business side, I mean, we can talk about this literally for days, right? In terms of being a lead gen or a lead magnet for your business, or if you're an organization like a company, we have solutions that are used for internal comms, onboarding, training, DEI, all that kind of good stuff. But for the average podcaster, who's not using it for business, why are you going to start a podcast, right? Like you have to love it, right? And what do you want to say? And what's the interest, right?
Exactly. And that's one of the things is that you really have to love podcasting in order to start a podcast, because just saying, oh, hey, everybody likes podcasts, I'll start a podcast. You don't really care for podcasts. You don't listen to them. You're not really going to get the flow of what people are looking for. You're not really going to know how your audience is going to engage with it. You're not really setting yourself up for success. So you really have to love the medium and know what you're kind of diving into before you dive into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So once you know, once you're clear on
that's the first part.
That's the first part. And you've been struck by that lightning of an idea and you're like, okay, this is my thing. And whether, there's a lot of podcasts for business that also, have that as well. Hey, I'm going to start a podcast where I interview people within my industry, or I hear stories, or I hear success stories, or case studies, anything like that. Whether you're a coach or whether you have a service business or veterinarian, in the pharmaceutical industry, there's a lot of different ways that podcasting is used for business as well. And it's just about that excitement and making sure that, you know your why. That's really clear. And now I want to talk about the what and topics versus formats. So this is really interesting because, in terms of topics, right? Podcast, it's like people say, how many kinds of podcasts out there? It's like, well, how long is a piece of string? Right? So, there are designated categories within a lot of directories that, everybody has to segment your podcast into because you want to be listed. Maybe if you're a business podcast, you want to be listed with business podcasts, that kind of thing. But at the same time, every podcast is unique and every podcaster has something unique to bring to the table. In terms of topics, there's a few. So we're going to go over a couple today. We're going to go over kind of the most popular topics and formats. So the first is storytelling.
Yes. This is our favorite kind of podcast. We do host storytelling podcasts. We have a whole podcast channel dedicated to the storytelling of podcasts. And whenever I talk about this, so many people are like, oh, but this is going to be a nonfiction podcast. This is going to be me and my friends talking about things. You're still telling a story because that's what's really engaging to people. If you're not telling a story, then people aren't going to, they're not going to stick around because it's just kind of the ramble of everything. They want to know, okay, what's going on, what's keeping me engaged, what's the hip, what's, the rise in tension, what's like the climax of everything, where you go, oh my God, that's so crazy. And then they go, oh yeah, wasn't it? And then afterwards, me and all my friends went out for a beer and it's like, oh my God. So
Right.
even if it's just you and your friends, like you have to tell a story.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something where also, we've talked about this previously on lives and on episodes of Podcasting Smarter, but even if there's a fact, if it's within a story, people are 20 times more likely to remember it. So there's something about our brains that's like wired for story. So that's really important. So, whatever form storytelling takes in your podcast, it's important
to remember. It's really funny that you say it like that too, because there's actually a whole craft book on writing that's called Wired for Story that details how the human brain has evolved over, the centuries to be wired for storytelling. It's how we pass along, warnings, how we pass along victories, how we, just engage with each other. So storytelling is really the heart of, a person.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's interview shows, which are so popular. And I think everybody loves, right? Because then you get to hear the perspective of one podcaster, and how they fit into a show, right? So it's about, first of all, storytelling, right? Hearing that person's story or hearing about their expertise or hearing what they're there to speak about. But then also it's a lot of the art of the interview.
Right. It's knowing the best questions, of letting the conversation kind of lead itself and knowing, okay, I can direct it this way, asking this question, or, oh, they mentioned this, I can ask this question to lead naturally into the next thing. And it seems so effortless, but it really does take a lot of practice to kind of get to that point where you can make it seem effortless. And it's always an adventure checking out new interview-based podcasts and seeing how people are asking questions, what funky new questions people are asking. I would love to compile a list of like the most unique questions I've heard people get asked on an interview podcast, just to give people inspiration for, cool questions you can ask that are still going to be engaging, but aren't, a repeat of every other question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also, what's great is that maybe, there's a guest that you like, there's an expert in a certain area, and they may go on several podcasts, right? But every interview is different. And what I think is really cool is that the way that the podcaster crafts that interview and has it fit into, the overall narrative of their show is so cool. And it really gives you an opportunity, right? Because there's a lot of, when somebody publishes a book, a lot of the time they try to get on several podcasts. They try and do several podcast interviews to promote the book. Because, writing and publishing a book is a big deal. And there's so many podcasts on books, what to read and fandoms, which we'll get into. But it's something where, if you're going to have an interview show, make sure that you have that voice as well. Think about, how each interview you want to be the same, how you want it to be different. Are there any questions that are unique to your show that maybe you ask at the end of every interview or at the beginning, right? Just to kind of be a signature for your podcast, which is great. And then we've got, in terms of storytelling, we've got scripted fiction, which is really, really cool. Okay. And I would love to hear your take on this, Roni, because this is your baby.
Oh, this is my baby. I love scripted fiction with all of my heart. And it is, I don't even know where to begin with it, because there are things that I want to say that I feel like people are going to say that's not true, because I want to say scripted fiction podcasts are kind of what launched everybody's real interest in a podcast, because we all know Welcome to Night Vale. I certainly remember Welcome to Night Vale. I have plenty of their merch, and it's like it's the show that kind of kicked everybody into thinking, oh, hey, I can start a podcast. I can do a podcast. And then there's so many different like creative, sci-fi fantasy podcasts that really got people going, oh, hey, I can start this. That kind of just like kept spawning off new podcasts. There's like live play D&D podcasts that are super engaging. People love listening to them. I'm not going to name any because there's so many, but it's so fun because it allows you to really tell a different kind of story, because, with most fiction podcasts, if I could talk, with most fiction podcasts, they're going to be audio only. And so it really kind of makes you work a different way within the medium to tell the same kind of story and give people the chance to really be immersed in everything, while taking into consideration that they're really just listening to everything. They're not seeing it in the way that they would with, other types of media. So it's I love it so much. I'm just sitting here at rotating fiction podcasts in my brain because my brain doesn't even want to put out thoughts, just going fiction podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's great is that the creativity is there, right? So a lot of the time when we think podcast, we think of maybe one specific show or the show that maybe we listen to, right? Because I think everybody has a general genre of show that they listen to more than others. Some people are a mixed bag in terms of their listenership, but if you have one specific kind of show that you listen to, know that there's so many out there. There's scripted fiction like we're talking about, and a lot of these shows are doing incredible things. And we've created a lot of content here at Podbean, especially through our Storytelling Podcast Week, where we talk to scripted fiction podcasters about sound design and script writing and all of the detail that goes into it, because you're listening to something and you think, oh, this is so quick. I love this episode. It was 30 minutes. It was great, but you don't know it took days or weeks or even months to produce. So it's definitely helpful to know what goes into that as well. When you're thinking about scripted fiction, there's also nonfiction narrative storytelling, which, is going to be like your Radio Lab or some of those podcasts that, tell a story in a documentary style way. So if that's also a genre that you can look into, and then fandoms, which I think we touched on with the D&D. So, I mean, if you are a fan of something and you have something to say, there is a podcast for you to make, like 100%.
Oh, absolutely.
And some of these fandom podcasts are super popular. It's something where it really becomes its own thing. So, and I'm sure, for big TV shows, there's some fandom podcasts. For D&D. Literally any fandom that you can think of, there is room for a podcast. And I want to talk a little bit about formats, because there's a few formats. And, if you're thinking for your show, you may have it in mind what you already want to do, but there's a couple of options. So we're just going to go through them now. The first is co-hosted, where you have two hosts and you just talk about
and multiple hosts.
Or multiple hosts. Yeah, we'll get to that. But co-hosted is where you have just several hosts and you talk about the topic for each episode. Then we've got a panel format, which is, as you would think, there's a host and then there's a couple of panelists every time and you discuss a specific topic, which is really fun because then you can mix up the panelists and get different opinions. And so that's also a great option. Then we've got narrative, which I know Roni wants to talk about.
I know. I just started listening to a new one. So I'm just like thinking about that one every time. And I don't want to like name drop it in case it's like one of those weird ones that people are like, why are you listening to that one?
Oh.
But it's just like... It's so good. It's so good, guys.
And narrative is really where you're going to tell that story. And maybe you have a script. Maybe you're using sound design. Maybe, you're pulling sound effects. We've got a lot of content here at Podbean where we talk about that. And, we want you to know what goes into these podcasts, because it's so amazing when you hear something, but then to know what goes into it, it really helps you paint the picture of, how you want your show to sound. Then we've also got solo casts, which are really cool. Solo cast is just you and the mic, and a lot of the time when people talk about podcasting, they think, oh, it's me and the mic and I'm alone in my house in a cave, in a pod cave. And I think that is a really common format. But there are other formats. So if you want to have a solo cast, it's you and the mic and you get to do whatever you want. And that's really fun. And then also in terms of format, it's important to think about whether you want your show to be episodic or serial. And episodic, I'm going to talk about episodic, and then I want you to talk about serial, Roni. So episodic is where your podcast has an episode that can stand on its own. And so it's like, when you watch a sitcom, right? Maybe you miss a couple of episodes, but if you watch the current episode, you don't really need to catch up. Each episode can stand alone on its own based on the content. Maybe the format's the same every time. Maybe not, but it stands on its own. It doesn't have to tie into a greater theme. And then Roni, tell us a little bit about serial podcasts.
So serialized podcasts are going to be podcasts that have a cohesive theme or a cohesive plot that plays out over the course of, a season or the entire series. Both serialized and episodic podcasts can be broken down into seasons, but with serialized podcasts, it's really done to kind of convey the fact that there is a specific arc that they're going for. So season 1, this person's going on this adventure, or season 1, we're covering this particular topic, like I'm a true crime podcast. I'm covering, this specific bank robbery. And then the next season I'm covering, this specific heist. So it really gives you an idea of, okay, I know that when I listen to this episode, I'm going to have to listen to the next couple episodes in order to get an idea of what's going on. Or if I tune into episode 3, I have to recognize, oh, hey, I missed out on episode 1 and 2. So I'm going to be kind of, tossed in the middle of things and not really know what's happening. Both have their merits. With the serialized podcasts, they really do kind of tend more towards the marathoning of podcast episodes. So it's really great if you're on a road trip and you're like, oh, hey, I want something that's really going to keep me engaged. I turn in,
Buckle in.
59 and keep it going. If it's something where it's like, yo, I only have 20 minutes and I don't want to, end one episode and try to start the other without missing something, I would probably go for something that's episodic because I know that, if I just tune in the middle, I still know what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're thinking about starting your podcast, we're giving you a lot of options here. So if you have your idea, you're going to want to skip to the next point.
Welcome to the buffet, guys.
Yeah, but it is really important because, a lot of the time it's something where we kind of are aware of, but we don't necessarily have the top of mind awareness or the verbiage to describe, right? So when you're thinking about your podcast, think, okay, do I want everybody to tune in no matter what episode? They can just jump right in. Or is it, I want to take them along for a story? And there's benefits to both, Roni, like you were saying, in terms of episodic, people can jump in at any time. And some episodes are going to be, super popular and you'll get that variety. And with narrative, what we've also seen is that once people buckle in for that binge listen, the retention rate is much higher, right? Because they're invested in the journey of the narrative arc or the arc of the show. So there are benefits to both. And I want to talk next about who is your audience, right? So when you're creating a podcast, you always want to think, who is your audience? And at Podbean, we talk about creating or constructing your audience avatar.
Yes. My favorite thing to do. I mention this with almost every, talk that we give on starting a podcast, on the webinar. If you've tuned into our How to Start a Podcast webinar, you might have heard about me talk about this. But when it comes to creating an audience avatar, what you're doing is creating a fictionalized stand-in for your idealized listener. So you're going to say, okay, what does my perfect listener do? Do they, listen to multiple episodes in a row? Do they listen to one episode and come back later? Do they really engage on social media? Do they like, posting every single day about something? Are they more of the lurking type where they kind of really only engage with their close friends on things? Do they, like the specific aspects of this topic that I like? Do they dislike it? And how do they engage with that? And with the example I give, my example is always that, like, say I'm a Marvel podcast. I'm starting a Marvel podcast and my audience avatar is Kevin. Now, Kevin also likes Marvel. He only likes the movies. He does not like the comics, which is unfortunate because I like the comics and the movies. But knowing that, it's like, okay, I can try to target movie content towards Kevin. Kevin, this perfect version of my listener is on Instagram and on Twitter. I can say, okay, to target Kevin, I can be more active on Twitter and on Instagram. And in kind of doing that, I know it seems a little weird. What you're doing is, in creating your perfect listener, you are creating a targeted way to create your content and to create content about your podcast. And in doing that, you are guaranteeing that more people are going to kind of tune in. Because if you try to create something that's like, oh, this is for everybody, anybody can listen to it, it's going to be very broad and you're not going to get the same kind of engagement from listeners as you would from saying, okay, this is the specific topic I'm covering. This is how I'm going to cover it. This is where I'm going to be found. And you're going to find more people that way who are more willing to engage in a more thorough fashion than just trying to be broad. Sorry, I started like a sentence and didn't finish it.
No, absolutely. It makes sense. It totally makes sense. And I think it's important just to think like you were saying, even from an episodic versus serial standpoint, right? Is your audience going to have a long commute, or are they going to be fans of something that, carries them from one episode to the next? Or is it going to be like, hey, they're super excited every week to hear you talk about a different topic. And maybe if they miss an episode, it's okay. So it's really important to think about the listening habits and, what your audience is going to be interested in. And I also want to talk about when next, because consistency is key in terms of creating your podcast.
Yes, consistency is the number one thing to really get your audience to come back every single week. For example, if you say, okay, guys, I'm going to publish my podcast every Tuesday, you're going to see it like before noon. So it's always there, Tuesday afternoons for you. People are going to come to they're going to come to depend on that. They're going to say, okay, I always know that on my way home Tuesdays, I can tune into my favorite podcast while I'm walking home from school or walking into work. I know I can still listen to this. If you are one of those people that's like, I want to publish every single Tuesday, but I end up publishing on Wednesday one week and Monday the next week, and then I skip a week, people aren't really going to see that as dependable. They're not going to say, oh, hey, I'm going to check in every Tuesday to see if it's there. They're going to wait a couple weeks and they go, oh, hey, I'm going to, tune in to see if there's a backlog or how many I missed. So in order to keep that, weekly engagement, that monthly engagement, that, have people tuning in every time you publish, you want to have that specific time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think that it's something where, there's this kind of like psychological training of your audience. Right. Number one, right? So like if you have an expectation, almost like with TV, right? If your show comes on at a certain time, you're excited about it. It kind of makes your day. And maybe they're not going to listen exactly at the time when the episode drops, but maybe they listen that night or the next day, but it's within a routine for them. And this also applies for seasonal podcasts as well. So maybe you have a set season where it comes out once a week and then you say, okay, guys, the season's going to run, for 3 months or 6 weeks or 5 months, or, a year, whatever it is. Right. And then they'll know, okay, this is a season. And even if you put parameters on either end of it, it's so important to have that consistency. For your listener and for yourself, because pod fade is real. Pod fade is podcast burnout. It's a really, we came up with our own, like the industry, we all came up with our own term for podcast burnout because it can be common, and if you don't have that parameter set in place and you don't have that construct of, okay, this is when my episodes come out, or this is my season that I'm going to produce. I think it and there's no end to it. And you're like, oh gosh, an episode every week, and after a while the pressure can build up. But it's important to also release your episodes at certain times every week and every, maybe a set time and day each week, because your listeners will learn to listen then, but it also helps with knowing when your listeners are going to tune in. So at Podbean, we can generally tell you when your listeners are listening, right? So if there is a time, where people are listening and maybe it's different from when you drop your episodes, when you publish those episodes out, you'll be able to change it. So don't be afraid to mix things up. But it is something where, have that consistency, but then also don't be afraid to pivot if the data tells you something different. Because what's great about podcasting is that you're getting data. Right?
Exactly. And that's the thing. For example, with the example I gave, say you're publishing your podcast every Tuesday in the morning, but you look at your stats and the heat map tells you, okay, the majority of my listeners are tuning in Thursday afternoon. What that tells me is that if I adjust when I publish my episode, I can really take advantage of when everybody is online. I can start posting stuff, on my social media saying, hey, let's talk about the new episode, and really get that engagement going. Because not only is that going to inspire other people who are just kind of like seeing this on the peripheral to say, oh, hey, I wonder what they're talking about. Maybe I should tune in. It actually helps you within the algorithm, because the more attention your episode gets within the first 24 hours of being posted, the more attention the algorithm pays to it. So you really want to make sure that you're taking advantage of when your audience is online to post within that same kind of 24-hour period.
Absolutely. And that kind of leads us directly into our next point, is the where, right? Where you want to distribute podcasts because of those algorithms. So the first is podcast directories. So if you're new to podcasting, where you're listening may not be where where the podcaster is publishing the podcast, right? So at Podbean, you publish your episode and it can go to every directory you want to send it to. It'll go to Apple Podcasts. It'll go to the Podbean public app. It'll go to Amazon. It'll go to Spotify. It'll go everywhere you want it to go. And so, you also want to be cognizant of which directories are working for you, right? And it's interesting because, you would think across the board, it's kind of all the same, but it's not.
Yep.
And if you have a specific listenership that's growing on a certain directory, you can also, comment on that. Like in your show, hey, if you're following us on Podbean, make sure that you like the podcast, or make sure that you write a review or anything like that, so that, within those specific directories where you have traction, you can expand upon that. which is really, really important. And so for everybody out there listening, when we say directory, that's where people are listening to podcasts on their phone, the app that they're listening from. And there are so many directories out there. Obviously the top ones are going to be Apple Podcasts. That's really big, and Spotify.
Oh yeah.
Yep. And then also social media. Roni, you touched on this with the Kevin example, right? Where's Kevin?
Yes. Kevin is on Twitter and on Instagram. And
Kevin's
that's so
on Twitter and on Instagram. Exactly. So, what's interesting is that not all podcasters, not all people who listen to podcasts are on social media. But if your audience is on social media, make sure you're on the platforms where your audience is. That's really important. And specific communities, for different fandoms or topics are more prevalent or are more active on different social media platforms. So it is important to be aware there. And then also what we found is that, not everybody on social media listens to podcasts. So a lot of podcast promotion can be done via other podcasts, which is really cool. And we have a lot of content here on that at Podbean with our ads marketplace and our pod ads dynamic ad insertion, where you can create a campaign to advertise your podcast on other podcasts, which is really successful for a lot of podcasters. And then also websites. That's really big as well. And then for businesses, if you have a company website, that's really big, but also your company intranet, right? So if you're a business and you have that company intranet, we have the internal podcasting solution here at Podbean, which, allows you to, utilize secure and encrypted content within an intranet. So a lot of companies do that. And we have this great embeddable player at Podbean for both public and private podcasts, and you can customize it. You can create playlists. And so maybe you have a website where people go, or they're directed to, or maybe, from a link in your social bios, you direct everybody to your website, or if they check out your website, you can embed your podcast with the latest episodes, specific episodes, and create really cool playlists based on content. So you've got that option
Absolutely.
as well.
The one thing we say about this is that the fewer clicks that there are between the listener and your podcast, the more likely somebody is actually going to click on your podcast.
Yes.
So for example, that's why we say the embeddable player is so great, because you can really just have that on the front page of your website. And so if somebody says, oh, hey, let me click the link in your bio, it takes me to the website. There's your episode. I can go ahead and click and listen. Whereas if somebody's like, okay, you have to click the link in my bio, you have to click the specific directory, and it'll take you to the directory, and it opens up something else, and it's not the page you're supposed to get to. At some point, they're going to hit click fatigue, and it could be 2 or 3 clicks in at that point where they're like, never mind, I'm switching to something else. Keep in mind that everybody's, attention span is going to be different. So you never know. But really, you want to shorten the distance between your listener and your podcast wherever you possibly can.
Absolutely. And you want to just make sure that you make it as easy as possible. I mean, we've all had that moment where you're like, oh, link in bio, and you click the link and then it leads to something else and it leads to something else. And you're like, and then, in the age of our smartphones, it's something where, a couple of clicks in and then you get a notification from another app and your attention is somewhere else a lot of the time. So that's real. That's real.
Well, and it's one of those things where it's hold on, I had the thought and I lost it. It's one of those things where you also have to make sure that you're promoting your podcast in smart ways. So for example, on the different social media sites, you can post audiograms of your podcast, where it's like a short video clip or a short audio clip with like a static background of your podcast. So really anybody just has to do the one click to just start listening, instead of saying, oh, hey, check out the link in my bio. Make sure you have audiograms or like clips posted periodically, so people can really just like go to your profile and see it right there. And then that's the way to really keep people like engage with your content, is just put it right in front of them.
Absolutely. And then the next thing to think about is, kind of the roadmap or the format. So do you want to have a script, right? Yes or no? and sometimes that it's not a direct yes or no, right? It's to what extent, right? Do you want to have a script for your intro? Do you want to, do a customized intro, walking people through the episode at the beginning of each episode and write a script for that? And then, the episodes may be more casual. If it's an interview, do you want to have, clear, produced, scripted questions and, have each question almost as a standalone thing? Or do you want to have, kind of a flow of a conversation? There's a lot of options with how scripted you want your podcast to be, right? So that's also an option. And then also the roadmap, right? So you want to create a roadmap, number one, for yourself, because when you're in it and you're, 40, 50 episodes in, it's helpful to just have a format, have that roadmap, you know what to do. And then additionally, if you bring in anybody else, if maybe you're like, oh gosh, I really don't enjoy editing. Maybe I should, get some editing support. You can give that roadmap to anybody who's going to help you, and they'll understand the format of the show. So generally your roadmap is going to be your introduction, right? You welcome listeners, you state what the episode is going to be about. You tell them, where you can be found, follow us, like us, 5-star review, anything like that. I'm sure we've all heard those intros. And then you want to have, the main topic of your episode, that meat and potatoes. And then you could also utilize segments. That's an option to break your show up into multiple smaller segments, right? A lot of interviews do, a big chunk and then a break and then the end of the interview, or they'll have, quick fire questions at the beginning or the end where they ask, the same questions and they're, very quick one word answers, that kind of thing. And then you want to have an outro. So, thank your listeners, tell them where you can be found, all that kind of stuff. But having that roadmap is vital because when you get tired, or maybe you're experiencing pod fade, or you want to bring in external help, or you want to bring in a co-host or anything like that, or you want to, automate. So maybe the intro is going to be, you've had it as something that is the same every time, but now you want to start changing it up, with specifics for every episode and, details and timestamps and all that kind of stuff. It's, you have the option, and it's helpful in future. So I want to talk next about recording. Dun, dun, dun,
yeah.
So Roni, tell us a little bit. First of all, we have the Podbean app. So let's talk about that.
Yep. Yeah. So you can actually start a podcast and record it directly within the Podbean app, whether you're recording with just yourself, or you want to utilize our group recording feature, or even if you want to use the remote recording option with our live stream portion of our app, you can. All you need is a pair of headphones. You can go in, start recording. You can do some edits where you cut some stuff out. You can add background music, and you can publish it literally within minutes. So if you have that idea where it's really just kind of like, hey, I'm starting a microcast, it's going to be 5-minute chunks, or hey, I'm doing this podcast while I'm experiencing van life and traveling the road, or I'm doing this while I'm at different conferences and giving people glimpses at different panels for different fandoms. You can really just have at it and go from there. There's nothing stopping you. The world is your oyster. Just phone and headphones. It's all you need.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you are ready to record right now and the ideas just struck you and you're like, okay, I'm ready to go. And, it's something where you're not going to want to download and put on effects or do sound design or anything like that. And you just want to hit the mic and go. The Podbean app is here for you. And the recording quality is actually really incredible from an app.
Absolutely.
And it's amazing. And then also there's DAWs, which it's people call it a DAW. And just within the industry, it stands for digital audio workspace.
Yeah. It's really funny because I kept hearing people say that so many times. I'm like, what is that? And I never thought to Google it for a year and a half after I started my podcast. It's like, oh, that's what that is. I know what that is now. Okay.
Yeah. Because we all use them, right? If you're using a program to edit your podcast, if you're using any kind of technical software, that's a DAW. But what's great about podcasting is that a lot of people who have a big audio background, who maybe have a public radio background, have entered the industry. And there's a lot of really great content coming out. And I think that there's room for everyone in podcasting. And so it's great to hear about what goes into those shows and how much work and how much research and how much sound design and all of that goes into it. But sometimes we get these technical terms thrown at us, right? And it's like, well, maybe we know how to use this thing. We know what the program is, but we don't know necessarily what the acronym is. And so I think as the industry is evolving, we're all kind of catching up. So if you hear that term DAW, it's a digital audio workspace. So you've got that. And then for basic recording gear, walk us through a couple of things, Roni.
So you can really record with anything there. You can just start with, the simple $20 microphone. You can, expand to a Blue Yeti. You can expand to a Shure microphone, like what Norma Jean's using, because that is a Shure, right?
Yeah, it is. Yep. MV7.
Hey. You could even use your AirPods like I'm doing, because I lost the cord. Plug into my computer, which is also important. I was thinking about this yesterday, and I feel like it is so important that people recognize how important cords are for everything when you're recording, because really all you need is your microphone plugged into your computer, but you need the part that plugs in. So please make sure you have the right cords.
And make sure you have the right cords and headphones. That's also really important.
And headphones. Yes. Headphones are super important because it cuts down on echo. And it really just kind of like isolates the sound so you can just kind of hear yourself. And it just really helps with recording and editing to kind of isolate everything in and of itself. If you do things without headphones, you get that echo, you get that feedback, and it's kind of hard to edit that part out, especially if you've never edited anything before. So really save yourself the trouble, invest in some headphones. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. We do recommend corded headphones just because having headphones that are Bluetooth or have like cords that disconnect creates a failure point, which means that at some point, if your headphones like start to sputter out, it's going to be around that point instead of just like the cords that are like just embedded in. So corded headphones are your best friend here.
Corded headphones, and then your recording interface, whether it's the Podbean app, you're ready to go on the fly, or a DAW, right? Digital audio workspace.
Exactly.
And also I think in terms of recording tips, it's really important, just to use notes if you want to keep yourself organized. Roni, you always talk about hydrating, right? Warm up your voice, have a glass of water.
One, for people who don't know really what we mean when we say warm up, what you really want to do is you want to practice speaking, practice enunciating. So when you get into the actual recording, you're not slipping up too much, your voice isn't cracking, you're not, sputtering out towards the end of sentences. You're reminding yourself how you're supposed to breathe while you're talking. You're reminding yourself, okay, I have to speak a little slower so I don't stumble. One of my best pieces of advice when it comes to warming up is to read a poem or sing a song, because it really helps you with your enunciation and your speed, which are two things that I think that everybody needs to focus a little bit on. So that's definitely a place to start. And there's obviously more tips out there on warming up, but if you don't really know where to start, a poem is my usual go-to. So
yeah, absolutely. Because it brings you back into that present moment of your cadence and your pace. Pace is such a big one in podcasting.
Yes.
So that's really important. Make sure that you're familiar with your gear, no matter what you're using, right? Whether it's a, state of the art technical mic, or, whether it's your phone and you're recording on the Podbean app, just make sure that you're familiar with it before you're like right in the moment and you're unsure, or you hit the wrong button. I think that's really important.
Right.
And you don't need a soundproof room, but just to make sure that you don't have a lot of reverb where you're recording. And then also figure out how to position yourself physically. This is also really important.
Yeah.
So those are some basics. Yeah, those are some basics with recording.
Sarah, I was going to say, for example, if you know that you're sitting down and you're going to be recording a 30-minute episode, know how you're sitting, make sure you have good posture. If you're going to sit in a specific way, know that if you're going to move, your microphone's going to pick that up. I don't recommend recording while laying down because, first of all, that kind of compresses your lungs. So it's a bit harder to breathe and to, speak. And also it's just kind of uncomfortable to do it. I'm not speaking from personal experience whatsoever.
No, I mean, the thing is, we're talking about the basics here, but we've seen it all, so it's definitely something where, right, exactly. So, it's just good to make sure that you can project. You're in a good place. You're either sitting upright or you're standing, and that you feel comfortable in your body. So that's really important. And then cover art. Cover art's a really big one. It actually makes a bigger impact than you think it would. So on the basics, we've got the specifications here at Podbean, and we'll pop the link here in the show notes for this episode if you're listening to the replay. But you want to have at least 1400 by 1400 pixels and maximum 3000 by 3000 pixels. It's going to be a square. And then additionally, it has to be a square. It has to be a square. That's right.
Has to be a square.
That's right. It has to be less than 1 megabyte, and it has to be in JPEG or PNG format. So sometimes, because Podbean hosts so many podcasts, this is a common issue where, maybe the file size is slightly too big, or maybe it's not in a JPEG or a PNG format. So it's really important to just make sure that you meet those specifications. And then, the cover art is going to tell your audience the vibe of your show. I don't want to, it's not going to tell a lot of technical because it's a small graphic, but it's going to portray the feeling. A lot of directories, if you have great artwork, you have a greater chance of being featured. There's a lot of benefits to having good artwork. It's going to draw in the eye because, we've had a lot of audience development experts at Podbean talk about this. And people come on Podcasting Smarter from different audience development organizations, and they talk about the fact that getting someone to listen and keeping someone listening are two different things, right? And so getting that person to listen to your show, they're not going to listen to audio. That's not going to draw them in. What's going to draw them in before the audio? Your cover art, your description.
Absolutely.
And so it's important to have these things be succinct and describe your show, because it's something where it really does make the difference, right? If somebody's scrolling through a directory and they're thinking, I want to find a new show, and they see your cover and it grabs them, it's going to help people find your show.
Absolutely. And keep in mind that no matter what your podcast cover art is, it needs to be recognizable no matter the size.
That's right.
So whether it's, a small icon that's, up in the top of a tab, or if it's something that's taking up somebody's entire phone screen, people need to be able to recognize it, which means you really need to focus on color and on the detail, I suppose. I'm trying to figure out the best way to say this, because everybody's aesthetic is going to be
right. You want to make sure it's scalable. You want to make sure it portrays what your show is about, and you want to make sure that it grabs the eye. I think those are all really important things. And we're talking about this in detail because this is the feedback we hear within the industry, right? From top directories, from podcasts that get featured, all these different things. So, it's something where that cover art is super important, because it's the first impression that people have of your show in a lot of instances. So
absolutely,
you want to make sure that you get them from the get-go. And then music is also really important. Using music in your podcast. We have a lot of music on Podbean that you can use if you're recording on Podbean. We've got a lot of free music. You can use your intros, outros, transitions, background music. If you want to source your own music, just know that you have to have the rights to it. That's really important as well. And just make sure that, there's so many ways to get music for your podcast. You can have somebody compose you something. You can purchase, you can purchase, music online. You can license it. You can use music from free directories that's already open license. So there's a lot of options, and there are some programs that also have free music included, like GarageBand, LMMS, that kind of thing. And then lastly, Roni, let's talk about hosting.
Yes. This is one of the most important parts of starting your podcast, because this is where your content is going to live as you're sending out to different directories, different social medias. And so you really have to ask yourself, what do I need from my podcast host? What are my goals? How can they help me reach that? And then find the podcast host that helps you reach those goals, because they have the tools that you need. So, it's always possible to switch podcast hosts, but that really is just kind of such an extraneous step. So really, as you're starting your podcast, you want to do that in-depth research to what different hosts offer. What does it cost per month? Do they have an option to pay yearly? Do they have monetization options built in? Do they have extra features that really enhance the podcast experience for both me as the podcaster and for my podcast listeners? And so you really want to find something that meets all of the goals that you set for yourself and for
your requirements. Absolutely. So some of those every podcast host is going to give you an RSS feed, and that's what you use to submit your podcast to different directories. And then every time you publish an episode, each directory is going to pull the RSS feed and publish it. So your podcast isn't hosted on all the places where people listen. It's hosted on a hosting platform like Podbean. So that's why we like to talk about hosting. But it's some really important things to think about are, what analytics and metrics are you going to get from your host? What are the monetization opportunities? And a lot of the time, we have free hosting at Podbean. And we also have so many different plans where we've got unlimited audio, unlimited video, and, you can start free and then upgrade. It's definitely something that's there for you. But, when we're talking about free, is free really free, right? Is there a monthly upload or download bandwidth limit? That's number one to think about, right? And then number two, how much does it cost per month or per year? Because sometimes maybe, something that's free, you're going to pay more if your show gets even a couple of thousand downloads than you would if you had just gotten the paid plan. So that's really important to remember and to just look at, and you can always migrate over to Podbean, or you can always, upgrade your plan as needed. But it is something to consider when you start. What specific tiers does your host offer? Are there any resources? Here at Podbean, we're really big on support. Yeah. We just want to make sure that everybody has the tools and creates a podcast. That's number one. And we've got a lot of tutorials on our site. So if you do have any questions, check them out. It's help.podbean.com. It's literally any podcasting question, there's going to be support there for you. And then also, in terms of additional features, you also want to think about, what else is there for me? We did speak a little bit about analytics, which I want to come back to, but are there any features like live streaming? At Podbean, we've got live streaming and then monetization. So a lot of hosts that are free may not have that monetization option as well. And when we talk about monetization, this is the most exciting for us because podcast monetization is so cool. And to watch podcasters, start to make money, and for some of them even make a living off of their podcasts is such a cool thing to see.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, we've got something called dynamic ad insertion and pod ads here at Podbean. So if you have your own sponsors, you can insert your own ad at any point in the episode. You just select the timestamp. We've also got an ads marketplace. So there's a lot of options for podcasters out there. And we just want to make sure that you have the right options and that you know what the options even are that exist.
Absolutely. And keep in mind, when we talk about dynamic ad insertion, this is going to be where we insert the ad without you having to go back in and edit an episode.
That's right.
Which is why it's so prevalent when it comes to podcast advertising, because it allows you to run campaigns on your back episodes so that they're continuously monetized whenever somebody starts your podcast right from the very beginning. It allows you to take old advertisements out that are no longer, paying you, so you can insert new ones so you can continuously get paid. And it really just kind of eases you into the whole advertising game.
Absolutely. And it may not be that you're running a campaign for an external advertiser. It may be that you launched merch, right? Exactly. And you want to tell everybody who listens to any episode of your podcast in the next month, right? Whether it's your first episode from 2 years ago or the episode you put out this week, that merch is available. And here's the link. So it is something where, right. So it's something where, you just want to make sure that you know what options are available and what you want to exercise. So thinking about your host is super important. And here at Podbean, obviously we've got a lot of options. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us at podcastingsmarter@podbean.com. Well, Roni, we've gone over so much today.
I know, right? It's been crazy.
I know. If anybody out there has any questions about how to start your podcast in the new year, get ready. 2023, let's just call it. It's the year of the podcast.
It's the year of podcasters.
It's the year of podcasters. Exactly. Well, I'm going to read our brief intro and then we will wrap up today. Thank you so much for joining us, Roni.
Oh, of course. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you everyone for joining us at Podcasting Smarter for our December live event, Everything You Need to Know to Start a Podcast in the New Year, with Customer Success Manager Roni Gosch, on how to launch your podcast and have it up and running in 2023. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, Podcasting Smarter has live stream sessions like this one with top podcasters and experts. We also have exclusive recorded episodes on the Podcasting Smarter podcast. If you join late or want to have another listen to this conversation, you can replay this live stream on Podbean's YouTube channel and the Podcasting Smarter podcast. Podcasting Smarter is brought to you by Podbean. We're a podcast hosting and monetization platform and home to over 620,000 podcasts. To start your podcast, head over to podbean.com today. Thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for more podcasting tips and best practices in 2023 from Podbean. Happy podcasting, everyone.
Happy podcasting.
Thanks for joining us for this replay of our live event episode. If you have any questions about podcasting and want to get in touch with the Podbean team, reach out to us at podcastingsmarter@podbean.com. Happy podcasting.